Chapter 8. The Escape. I found myself in a grimy street, the rounded cobbles hard and cold on my knees. The dim sepia light made the world beyond my prison feel less inviting, but freedom it was. Frantically, I looked around for Felicia, but she was gone. I scrambled to my feet, trying to work out what to do. Just then carried on the wind the faint but undeniable sound of her voice uttered, "Run, Kentaro, run." I darted across the road, almost hit by a horse, which reared up. Terror seared through me, but I kept going, running with all my strength. Carts dashed past me, people hustling and bustling. The sounds and smells were an overload to my senses. People chanting from stalls, news criers ringing bells, the clatter of cartwheels, food, flowers, and grime all melded into one roaring blur. I ran, yet harder and faster, afraid that Io, or worse, was just behind me, but too terrified to even spare a glance back. And on I went, street after street, till my legs began to buckle, and my heart pounded in my chest. I gasped for air and stumbled, grasping a lamppost to steady my tired legs. I frantically looked around, spotting the large double doors of a bank. I stumbled over towards them in the hope of finding somewhere to hide inside. The double doors swung open, and a portly man strode out, his head held aloft, with a finely kept moustache. Beside him was a lady grasping his arm and wearing a flowing, flouncy dress. They turned and then boldly marched off together. Before the doors softly closed, I stole a look inside. It looked calm and quiet, so I waited for my moment. Sneaking behind a lady carrying a basket who was going inside, I ventured into the bank. Inside, the tellers were counting numbers and scribbling amounts, sitting at grand leather-topped desks. Each one was in their own world, blissfully unaware of me. So I ducked down behind a row of desks and slowly crawled under one that was vacant. I huddled beneath the dark wooden frame and closed my eyes, allowing my breaths to become long and gentle. The calming effect helped my mind clear and think of my next move. But sadly, that moment of bliss was rudely interrupted by an alarm, sounding, ringing in my ears. The bank doors swung open with such ferocity that they almost came off, and in walked a cloaked figure, marked by a sudden deadly silence. I hunkered down further under the desk, looking through a crack in the wood. The figure slowly moved further into the room, pulling back his hood to reveal a face that was a map of scars. I took a sharp breath in horror. He surveyed the room with cold, piercing eyes that felt lifeless. His presence made me feel suddenly cold, terrified, and hopeless. It was like he was sucking the very light and life out of the room by being there. His bony, wispy hands twitched and smoothly flapped back the side of his cloak to reveal a glinting whip, rolled and hooked at his hip. He raised what was left of an eyebrow, and a sharp, cruel grin curled the side of his mouth to reveal yellow, rotten teeth. A loud click punctuated him unbuttoning the single popper that held the whip in place, and even before his hand unravelled it, the whip seemed to convulse, shudder, and slither in excitement. His fingers curled around the handle, and he brought it up sharply into a crack, which seemed to split the very air and caused my heart to race. One of the tellers put his pen down to turn the page over, and to his surprise, as he routinely looked up, he caught a glimpse of the dark figure. Sweat suddenly began to run down the teller's wrinkly face, and his hands trembled. His colleagues were all blissfully unaware of the presence of the whip-wielding, unsavoury character, due to being far too engrossed in their numeric distractions. A guardian, the teller squealed, screwing his face up and closing his eyes as if by doing so it would make the guardian simply cease to exist. Transfixed and terrified, yet secretly curious, I sat beneath the sturdy desk, wondering what would happen next. To my utter horror, the guardian turned his head toward the cowering teller, the light highlighting his scars. "We have a runaway," the 9-foot-tall guardian said in a creepy, whispery scream. We have no runaways here," the teller squeaked. In a flash, and with no notice, the guardian flicked his whip in a deafening crack. It cut the air like plasma, erupting, slashing down on the teller, striking him across the face. The teller flailed around in agony briefly, then evaporated in a glow of heat. Another teller dashed from the inner door to take his now empty space at the desk and replace him. The giant guardian glared around the room, his cold, lifeless eyes probing and sucking the light out of everything they touched. "Now don't make me ask again," he said, then paused. "No, actually, do make me ask again," he corrected, a mean smile displaying his full set of rancid teeth. Suddenly, the tellers dropped their pens and scrabbled around in a frenzy, looking under the tables and around desks. I slunk deeper under the desk, but it was no use. One of the tellers stood pointing at me. "Here, here!" he screeched, and the cloaked figure was over in a flash, flailing his whip around. His eyes were bright with glee on spotting me, and in a sickly, jarring voice he uttered, "I love it when I have a license to catch one dead. Or dead." In a hot panic, I dived out from the side of the desk, barely getting through the tight opening and narrowly avoiding a lash of his whip, which overshot and tore through a nearby teller, causing him to evaporate into nothing in a scream. I thought I'd made it to the door, saved by my long legs, but alas, the dark figure was too quick. He raised his whip, letting it hover there, like he was savouring the moment. I dropped to the floor, cowering, and waited for the definitive blow, holding Felicia's face in my mind. She would be my last thought. Frozen to the spot, I waited for the definitive blow. Moments passed, silence encircled like a vulture. Still no lash. More time passed, till I dared a glance up at my looming demise. The whip was there in the air above him, incrementally coming down towards me. But slowly, so slowly, and then it simply stopped, along with the giant man. His body like a statue, just his eyes remained staring, burning into me. "Quick, this way!" Felicia shouted from the door, and I sped out. Back in the street, Felicia was nowhere to be seen, but the adrenaline clouded my mind, so I didn't care. It coursed through my veins, and I had an indisputable urge to flee, so I ran down a back alleyway. It was all a blur after that, of alley after alley. I refused to stop, till I found myself alone.